Hi, I'm Associate Professor Lyndsey Collins-Praino from the University of Adelaide. And as you may have already guessed from the structure sitting behind me, I am a neuroscientist. Now, what is a neuroscientist? Well, that means that I'm a scientist who studies the brain. I can't think of anything cooler to say that I study. Your brain is every thought you'll ever have, every emotion you'll ever feel, every action you'll ever perform. So, what could be cooler than getting to study this amazing organ system? Now, there are many different types of neuroscientists who work with everything from computer models to chemistry, biology, psychology. Now, my type of neuroscientist is called translational neuroscience. What does that mean? That means that I'm really focused on how do we optimize translating what we find within the basic science lab, or what we call bench science, to having really meaningful outcomes for patient populations. So how do we make sure that the studies we're doing in the lab are really relevant for human disease? My lab in particular is called the Cognition, Aging, and Neurodegenerative Disease Laboratory, which we just call CANDLE for short. Now, the name of that can tell you a lot about what we study. Some of you may know what cognition means. These are things like our thoughts, attention, decision-making, memory, all of those different aspects of cognitive function. And we know that many of these change, both as people get older, but also in neurodegenerative diseases. Now, what are neurodegenerative diseases? Well, these are a class of diseases that share in common the death of brain cells in particular areas. Two common examples that you may be familiar with are Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. Both of these disorders have a really significant human impact. Some of you may even know someone who experiences one of these two diseases, and you know the toll that it can take both on the individual experiencing the disease as well as on their family and loved ones. So what my lab tries to do is to understand what are the brain mechanisms that predict who's at risk of developing these diseases. The idea is that if we can identify who's at risk of getting these disorders early, then we can hopefully stop the disorder from ever developing, or get people into treatment early so that our therapies have a greater chance of being effective. We do this in many different ways, everything from cell culture models to behavioral testing in preclinical models of disease, all the way up to studies with patient populations who actually experience Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. We bring them into the lab and we do cognitive and motor testing and even neuroimaging with them. So it really involves the use of a lot of different techniques. Now, why do I think that this work is important? Well, the reason that I think that this work is so important is because of the real human burden associated with these diseases. We know that they really affect quality of life for the people who experience them. And we also know that there's a large economic cost to these disorders, both for the families affected as well as for Australia as a whole. What's also really concerning is that we have a rapidly aging population. The number of Australians over the age of 65 will double between now and 2050, and the number of Australians over the age of 85 will actually quadruple. And because both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's have age as a major risk factor, the more people we have living into older age, the greater the number of people who experience Parkinson's or Alzheimer's will be. So we really need to solve this problem now before what they call the silver tsunami really comes and takes effect as the baby boomer generation ages. Now, I was also asked to tell you about the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me as a neuroscientist. You can imagine, as someone who deals with a lot of brains, that there have been very many odd moments over the years. But the one that really sticks the most in my mind, and I'm sure in that of my mother as well, is way back when I was in university and doing the first study I'd ever done. What ended up happening was I went into the lab one afternoon and I noticed that the freezer in which we were keeping our brain tissue had actually ended up not working. And so it was rapidly defrosting and it was in danger of losing all of that really precious brain tissue. So I thought to myself, well, what can I do? And it was right around the Christmas holidays, so there wasn't really anyone around to ask for help. And I had to make a split-second decision. So I thought, I'm going to take these brains home. So I called my mother, who was at a Christmas party at the time, and I said, Mom, I really need to tell you about something. And she said, look, I'm at the party. Just go ahead and do whatever you have to do. And I said, well, okay, but are you sure that you don't want to talk about this in more detail? Like, this is really important. And she said, no, I trust you. Just go ahead and do whatever. So I got a little box. I put all the brains in it, brought it home, emptied my parents' fridge, put the brain tissue inside, and kind of forgot about it until later that night when my mom actually came home from the party. And there was just this perfect beat. And suddenly I heard, Lyndsey! And my mom, was very upset that I had filled her fridge with brains. I think that it's definitely a moment in neuroscience that I will never forget. Certainly one my mom won't either. The good news is the brain tissue was saved. I was able to bring it back to the lab. We were able to do some really cool analyses in it, and it was the first paper I ever published. So the story had a really happy ending, but it definitely illustrated that neuroscience is sometimes not only just for the neuroscientists, but the whole family gets involved, whether they want to or not. I feel incredibly lucky to get to study the human brain, and I hope some of you might be interested in it too.